Hi, everyone. Our site for the semester was the Politz Day School located in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The following slides will be presented to you by myself, Marissa Hendrickson, Tatiana Guerrero, Kathleen Lawler, and Abigail Mills. The core values of Politz Day School include academic excellence, love of Israel and the sanctity of the Jewish people, educating each child according to their way, character development and respect, Torah and secular knowledge, and parent-school partnership. More specifically, we spent our time in the third grade classroom, where the classroom values were identified to be respect for oneself and others, teamwork, and support. Though our time was limited to get to know the clients, we learned that speaking with the staff and administrators at Politz Day School, that their challenge areas and needs included readjusting to in-person coursework as a result of the pandemic, as they've been experiencing a decrease in adherence to standards of behaviors, including negative classroom behavior, such as negative talk, decrease in respect for oneself and others demonstrated by the students, calling out of term, disrupting the learning of peers, and difficulties in emotional regulation and expression.
So our focuses for the groups that we created were to promote emotional regulation, encourage positive self-talk, create increased collaboration with peers, and support positive classroom behaviors and participation. We expected that students that would actively participate in all of the activities would develop an increased understanding of their own emotions and behaviors and how those emotions and behaviors then affect their classmates. Additionally, if we would have had time to run all of our groups, we would hope to see that all of our long-term goals would have been met. Those long-term goals were related to demonstrating good understanding of emotional self-regulation strategies, positive self-talk, reducing their frustration through coping strategies, participating in the classroom and using self-advocacy, and then also engaging in positive peer and teacher interactions.
So the first group activity was run by myself, and it was called the Road to Regulation, which addressed the zones of regulation. So the group goal was that by the end of the session, the students will identify 3 strategies that can be implemented into their everyday routine to improve upon their emotional regulation using the zones of regulation. The warm-up activity included emoji dice, where the objective was to encourage the students to participate and be open to sharing with others. The students were introduced to the zones of regulation and learned to identify the emotions that belong within each zone. The students played this game by tossing the ball around the group in the circle, and then they would display the emoji on the dice to the rest of the group, describe the emotion and which zone that emotion belongs in. The activity was an all about me car, where the purpose was to encourage students to take ownership of their emotions while respecting the emotions of their peers. Following the discussion of the zones, the students were instructed to decorate a car to express themselves and their interests. And then the students wrote I statements on their cars that demonstrated common emotions that they experienced throughout the school day, and they were instructed to place their car on the road to regulation under the corresponding color of their current emotion. Discussion questions included describing a time that they were in the blue, green, yellow, and red zones. What are some ways that they can help get themselves back to the green zone, and how might their actions affect what zone other individuals around them are in? Some successes and challenges in this included students demonstrating understanding of the common emotions and correctly identifying the zone which they belonged in. The students were actively participating in the group discussion, and they were eager to share. They correctly identified useful strategies to help get them back to the green zone, which indicated that they were ready to learn. Students were engaged and interested in the group warm-up and activities. Some challenges included the students often speaking over one another as they were eager to share, and distractions throughout the session of people coming in and out of the classroom. And then the students were just really excitable with visitors being in the classroom. So that was a distraction as well. So the outcomes and recommendations, there was a pre and post survey about the zones that the students identified themselves in. And the students demonstrated understanding of the zones as well as the emotions associated within each zone. They correctly identified the strategies to get them from a red or yellow or blue zone to the green zone so that they were ready to learn. And by the end of the session, the pie charts above indicate that students were able to implement those strategies to get them to a green zone so that they were ready to learn. Some recommendations include continuing to provide positive reinforcement to the students as they are participating, and also considering dividing up the students into smaller groups to eliminate distraction and encourage more open discussion. It was a bit of a larger group, so having smaller groups allows for more discussion. And then also considering the validity of the outcomes given participant attrition, again, because students were kind of coming in and out of the group. The second group is called Mirror Mirror. Unfortunately, this group was not physically run at the school due to time constraints, but the goal would have been that by the end of the group session, students would develop the skills to reframe negative thoughts into positive thoughts. And this would then increase individual self-esteem and respect by identifying 2 to 3 ability self-talk affirmations that they can implement every day. The warm-up included a toilet paper game where a roll of toilet paper would be passed around the class. Each student would be instructed to select a desired number of squares. And for each number of square, they would share one strength or positive thing about themselves to the group. The activity itself is a self-reflection mirror where the purpose is to encourage students to engage in positive thoughts, which can facilitate positive self-esteem and result in positive classroom behavior. The students would decorate handheld mirrors to express themselves and then write 2 of their favorite things about themselves or strengths, and then 3 ability self-talk statements on their mirrors. Discussion questions would include, how can your strengths be helpful in creating a more positive classroom and learning environment? How does using positive self-talk make you feel? And how can what you learned from this activity be implemented into the classroom each day? Again, unfortunately, due to time constraints, this group did not take place. But some recommendations would be to consider providing examples of negative talk and positive talk and asking the students to differentiate between the two. Also instructing the students to take only 2 to 3 pieces of toilet paper to remain mindful of the amount of time that the warm-up activity would take, and implementing a more difficult warm-up involving role playing. This would help the students come up with situations where they might be tempted to use negative self-talk, and then the leader would ask the students to come up with positive thoughts or affirmations they could have instead.
So the way in which the 3rd grade class was split up, Marissa and I would have been running with separate halves of the class simultaneously. So the activity I created was called Let's Take Our Temperature, which deals with the zones of regulation, similar to Marissa's first activity. So this activity, the goal was that participants would be able to identify one emotion from each zone in order to improve their overall emotional identification and regulation in the classroom. So to warm up, the students played Feeling Simon Says, which was just an activity to get the students to think through how they experience emotions and then what markers signal that they're experiencing each emotion. And it was also an opportunity for them to have a little movement break because some questions were thrown in, like jump on one leg, things like that. Just a fun way to introduce the activity, which was the feeling charades, which you can see in the pictures to the right. So this purpose of this activity was to help the students develop an increased understanding of their internal emotions and their emotional expression. So after we discussed the zones of regulation, the students used the cards on the left of the board there to act out in front of their peers. Their peers would identify which emotion they were displaying and then put it in the correct zone of regulation. Some of the discussion questions for this part of the activity could be, how did it feel to act out the emotions? Was it easy? Was it hard? What does each zone feel like inside your own body? And then what's something you could do when you're in the yellow zone to get back to the green zone? So some successes of this group were that the students seemed to really enjoy the warm-up activity and ask some really thoughtful questions about emotional expression. They also did really great at taking their turns and self-correcting if they put an emotion in the wrong zone. Some of the challenges were that the students were really eager to share their thoughts. So sometimes there was talking over one another or just general distraction. Some of the upgrades to make this activity a little bit more difficult could have been to have the students talk through their emotions rather than to act them out, or to increase the complexity of the terms on the cards. And then a downgrade could be to have students come up and act in pairs, or to decrease the number of cards in each zone. So at the end of the session, students were able to identify at least one emotion for each zone, and even self-corrected when a term was misplaced. And a lot of them also were able to identify one thing they could do to self-regulate if they did become upset during class. So recommendations would be to continue to provide group activities that involve movement, as the students are highly energetic, to also reinforce the ideas discussed in the groups through several activities, just as different students have different learning styles, and then also to continue to use specific positive reinforcement with students when running groups. And then the second activity I created was called Roll to Relax. So it's essentially the students got to make their own coping skills cube, which you can see there on the right. And then the warm-up activity was animal yoga, which you can see on the picture on the left. So the goal of this group was that students would be able to identify 4 coping skills that they could use if they're feeling dysregulated in the classroom. The warm-up was animal yoga to help the students regulate before the activity took place, and also to give them an idea for what a good coping skill could be. And then the activity itself is the coping skills cube, where at the start of the activity, as a group, we make a collective list of good coping skills, and then the students can write their favorites on their own cube, cut out the cube, and tape it together. Some of the discussion questions to be asked during this activity would be, what is something you like to do when you're sad so you feel happy again? And why is it important to know things that we can do to make us feel better when we're upset? So again, due to time constraints, this group did not take place, but some recommendations for running this group would be to think about how to explain the concept of coping skills beforehand, as could be difficult for some students to understand. Also trying to identify students that may need help cutting out the template beforehand, and not handing out the scissors or the template until after you've created a list of coping skills, just to minimize distractions. Some upgrades or downgrades to make it more difficult. You could provide minimal examples of coping skills at the beginning, so the students have to do more of the work on their own, or even do a 3D dice with 6 sides, or with like a hexagonal dice instead of the standard 6-sided dice, so they come up with more skills. And then downgrades could be to cut out the template beforehand so that the students don't have to handle scissors, or to provide more examples of coping skills at the beginning, especially if the students are unfamiliar with the concept.
Hi everyone. I'm Tatiana, and I created the following 2 activities. So Getting Cheesy with It was conducted in our second week at Politz Day School. And so the week prior, they actually had like a little pizza party. And so it kind of flowed well with that. We started off with just some jokes, some pizza jokes to kind of lighten the mood. And then as a team, so this activity really discussed the differences between talents and character strengths, and made the students work together to think of different actions that they can take in their class to make them set a good example. So this group had a lot of strong personalities, and so we focused on kind of identifying their talents, their strengths, and how they can use those leadership skills towards a positive classroom environment. Some successes and some challenges when doing this activity. So everyone had paper plates where they used toppings that included their talents, strengths, and actions. And sometimes different students couldn't identify themselves having any talent. So I think it was a success that, we kind of, through discussion, talked about what are some of their favorite things that they like to do. For example, some of them like singing, and some of them like dancing. And so relating that with being creative and good performers. Some students even said they're loud. So we kind of related that with being outgoing. And so 12 out of 13 students actually completed their pizza slice, and then got together with the other students to make pies of pizza, showing that through teamwork and their own uniqueness, they make a whole pizza slice for the whole class. And so this would improve their pride in their class, and positive support systems for each other. It was definitely challenging because, as mentioned by previous presenters, this class was it was very excitable. And so sometimes, keeping distractions to a minimum was definitely challenging. Definitely they were hyper focused on making crafts, and not so much on creating those connections during discussion time. But definitely at the end of the activity, they were very proud to share with each other their pizza slices, and finding commonalities with each other. So outcomes, as mentioned, 12 out of 13 students were able to identify a talent, a character strength, and a positive action that they can use to lead others to set a good example. And then also students connected with each other over discovering similarities, and that grows their self-respect for themselves and for each other. Some recommendations is maybe holding, just to keep that engagement going. A lot of the kids describe their pizza party from the week before as being fun. And so I would recommend maybe holding this activity on the same day as having the pizza party, just to engage them a little more. And then also just kind of prompting students during this pizza party, if it's held after the activity, to kind of act on those positive behaviors and character strengths that they chose earlier. Another recommendation would be to, so there were some students that were a little more shy about presenting their pizza. And so maybe that could be an opportunity where they can each help each other through, some students' strengths can help other students to share and just facilitate that discussion with each other. Okay, my second activity, and due again to time restraints, was not conducted, but this would be a great activity to do some role playing. So it's called role play action. And for this activity, students would be addressing 6 general social skills, which would be introductions, compliments, negotiating, saying no, offering help, and asking for help from adults. And so they would be role playing, doing some acting, which really allows them to get out of their character and venture onto situations that they might otherwise be uncomfortable with, to express themselves in a different way. Yeah, so they use these dice, as seen in the previous photo, that kind of prompt questions that they can discuss. And yeah, we'll see it in the next slide too. Some of these questions. Okay, so as mentioned, this activity was not held, but we would assume that students would have this opportunity to explore characters and pretend play, and explore how it feels to act on positive behaviors as prompted by the facilitator. And then the activity would end with each partner writing a little thank you note to their other partner, and kind of promoting, again, that positive behavior, not just verbally, but also doing like a little written note would be great. And then challenges, I would expect that some students would freeze up or not want to act out necessarily if they're a little shy, or not as outgoing as others. And so teachers and other facilitators should be ready to step in and address the challenge for the class to relate to, and kind of using it as an example or an opportunity for others to learn too. Or maybe I would also recommend including the rest of the audience or the rest of the class while others are acting, to be more engaged. They can either have clapping prompts, or provide live feedback as the actors are playing out their positive behaviors. So here you go. Here are some of the example prompts. And so there would be a dice. that would correlate with each prompt. Each number would correlate with each prompt. So students will learn how to model for others a positive behavior through role playing. And then I think if it were needed to be downgraded, providing pre-scripted written skits to follow would be helpful, so that students don't have to think up what to say on their own. And also, to make the activity more challenging, the skit can include 3 or more actors instead of just 2 actors.
So the group that I ran with my half of the 3rd grade class at Politz was called Happy Brains Think Happy Thoughts. So the goal of this activity was that by the end of the session, participants would independently identify 3 positive affirmations about themselves to improve confidence within the classroom. And based on the needs identified during our organizational profile visits, it really seemed that the students in this class could benefit from improving their positive self-talk skills. So the warm-up would focus on warming up their brains. So you'll see an example of the poster after, but the purpose of this warm was to make their brains happy with some movement and get them out of their chairs to warm them up a little bit. And we discussed why physical activity can be good for our brains during this warm-up activity. And then the activity itself was making Petey the positive polar bear, which you will also see an example of after this slide. So the purpose was to practice positive self-talk through writing 3 or more positive affirmations and creating a polar bear craft to promote student engagement and creativity. And some of the discussion questions here were asking the students what a positive affirmation is and if they could provide examples before engaging in the activity. And then when can we use positive self-talk to improve a negative experience within the classroom? So here you can see the example of the brain breaks poster. So the students took turns rolling the dice, and whatever number they land on in their column is the movement that they would do together. And then here's the polar bear mask that they made. So the first task in creating the mask was to write at least three positive affirmations about themselves. And then they followed the steps provided to create their masks. So some successes of the group were that most students were able to identify at least 3 positive affirmations about themselves with minimal prompting, and all students were able to complete the craft. And an upgraded that I implemented for some of the students who were more interested in writing more than 3 affirmations on their polar bear was to give them more time to work on that aspect and let them come up with multiple, and some of them even drew pictures to go along with their positive affirmations. And then some challenges that I experienced were that students demonstrated differing levels of engagement, and some completed the craft a lot faster than others, which created some distractibility by unstructured time for those students who were finished early. And there was also distraction due to direct access to students in the other group. So a lot of our participants were going back and forth and seeing what their friends were doing, which was fun to hear them talk about their different crafts that they were working on, but did create a challenge in completing the crafts in a timely manner. And then this created a lack of time for discussion following the activity. So outcomes were that all students were able to write at least 3 positive affirmations about themselves, but not all could do so independently, and a lot of them did need verbal prompting. But after help from myself and my co-facilitator, Abby, and the teacher in the room, all of them were able to write at least 3 on their polar bear. And so the students were able to recognize positive things about themselves that are true inside and outside of the classroom. So some recommendations in running this group or any other type of group in the future that follows a similar structure. I noticed a lot of the students had a lot of built up energy because this group was run just before recess time. So maybe finding a time in the day where the students aren't as ready to go and run outside could be beneficial for them participating in a sit down craft like this one. Also, providing the students with a specific amount of time to complete each part of the activity would allow time for discussion at the end. So just making sure that they're completing the activity in a timely manner. And then focusing on facilitating student conversation about situations in which they should utilize positive self-talk to ensure that they're getting the most out of this activity. So my other activity, which was not run due to time constraints, would have been called Raking in Respect. And so the goal of this group was that students would independently identify at least 3 signs of respect towards themselves, peers, and or teachers in various settings, because we know that respect is a value within this classroom. So to warm the students up, we could play a game called Respect or Disrespect. So examples of respectful and disrespectful behaviors would be given, and students would use different movements to identify if a certain situation was respectful or disrespectful, and then would be prompted to explain their reasoning after each example. The activity itself would be called the Tree of Respect. I'll show pictures after this slide, but that would be, the purpose would be to promote respect within the classroom by collaborating to establish concrete examples of how to be respectful in all areas of life. So the students would each have their own leaves that they would write examples of respect on, and they would need to do an example of respect to themselves, or respect to others, and respect to their surroundings. And so the discussion would focus on describing ways in which respect grows, and it would relate to the leaves growing on the trees. And we would address how being disrespectful may impact our relationships with one another, including classmates, teachers, friends, family members. So here are some examples. Because we didn't run the group, I don't have an example of how we would do it with their class, but just a lot of examples online of this type of activity. And hopefully the tree would be hung up in the classroom or the hallway.
So based on all of our groups, our outcomes include definitely the improvement of students' skills and self-advocacy, and self-regulation. Throughout all of our groups, positive self-talk and peer collaboration was encouraged. We also addressed emotional regulation, and through the completion of a lot of our activities, we know that we used communication strategies and applied cognitive behavioral strategies for them to engage in optimal learning in their environment, in their school-based environment. Another outcome of our experience at Politz Day School was that we collaborated with administration, support staff, teachers to experience reciprocal learning, as we learned from them as well, with this whole experience, learning from their students what they were already doing successfully and what could be improved upon, as we also provided strategies and these interventions for them to replicate in the future. So with the hypothesis that respect for others follows self-respect, a sample of students' attitudes towards their class was measured using a Likert scale of 4 questions with 5 answers choices for each. In here we can see it. So on the top, this is a little piece of paper that was given to each student, and they were read to, and as well as just given a couple minutes to look through the questions, which is: how much do you like your class? How proud are you of your class? How well does your class work together? And how well does your class set a good example for the rest of the school? And overall, you can see here in the light blue in the chart, the mean before, from pre-test to post-test, meaning like before the interventions and after the interventions, actually showed a positive pattern, with most of them improving in their perception of their class, their attitudes.
So based on these outcomes, some of our conclusions are that the clear goals and expectations set by the facility, so the administrators we worked with, really contributed to our ability to develop and run client-centered groups with the students. So because of their openness and willingness to share what the students were struggling with and what they needed help with, we were able to develop these groups. And the teachers were very willing to work with us and help facilitate our groups in whatever way possible, which helped with such large groups being run. And so in comparing the occupational therapy process with the mission and values of Politz Day School, we saw similarities in that both of us want to promote success in the student role. And we in the OT process, as well as the staff at Politz, are really focused on client-centeredness. So meeting the needs of the students and focusing on how we can truly help them to succeed in their role. And then finally, in building mutual respect and meaningful relationships. So as OTs, we want to develop respect and relationships with our clients. And at Politz, they really focus on developing respect between students and teachers and staff, and making sure that students can benefit from those relationships. So this is when we would allow time for any questions. But some of the reflections that we have on this experience. So as a group, we identified that we're leaving Politz after an exchange of ideas on how to support student participation in their formal education setting, and our time here taught us to remain flexible and emphasize the point that many of these skills are transferable as we we're navigating difficult situations with timing and COVID precautions, but we're still able to remain client-centered and have our client goals in mind while developing our groups. So after this experience, we all feel more prepared to work within cultures that may be different from our own, as this was a modern Orthodox Jewish day school, which is a new environment for all of us. And we got more experience creating groups that were fun and creative due to the nature of the population, so working with our third graders. So for some of us, this was a new experience that tested some of our patience because we are running groups during a pandemic with young students, and we need to think on our feet, brainstorm together, and be understanding of each other, which we really were able to do during this experience. And working in an elementary school setting in general was a challenging experience for our organizational skills, especially those coming from working with other populations in the past. And facilitating our groups required quick thinking and taught us that having partners throughout the process is key for success. So some of the pearls of wisdom we have for future students are that working with this site is a valuable opportunity to practice cultural competency and experience the OT process while following the values of other cultures. We advise other students at this site OT students at this site to learn as much as they can from teachers and faculty members at the school because they are so open and supportive of our learning and our needs for these assignments, and to focus on the needs of the students and how addressing them will promote their success in the classroom and meet site expectations for their students as well, and to try to build relationships with the students if time allows. We wish we had more time to do this, but you want the students to trust you and understand why you were there.
So our slogan is do it, think it, feel it, be it. This slogan represents the components that were addressed through OT intervention, as well as the strategies provided to support optimal student development and growth in their natural learning environment. On behalf of my group members and myself, we want to say thank you to all of the teachers, faculty, and students at Politz for accommodating us this semester. We've really had an amazing time learning from you, and we are wishing you all the best in the rest of this school year. And these are our references. Thank you.